Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will be reviewing the proposed resolutions for 2025-2026. Resolutions provide direction to the VSBA board and the VSBA staff as we advocate for positions at the legislature and as we develop programs and resources for our members. Resolutions truly shape our advocacy. Today's resolutions webinar includes new proposals that were submitted by school boards across the state, one proposal from the resolutions committee itself, and then recommendations on existing resolutions. First, a few logistics to cover. Please use the Q&A box if you have questions or comments. We are not using the chat today, just the Q&A box. At the end of the webinar, when you exit, you'll get a pop-up screen for a short survey. We really do look at the feedback and continuously work to provide what's most meaningful to all of you. And then after the webinar, we'll be sure to email you the link to the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and any resources or answers to open questions as we wrap up today. So again, our first body of work is to look at the proposed resolutions and the board's recommendation on all of those. And then we will be looking at the existing resolutions and the board's recommendations on those. Before we begin, though, let's review the VSBA bylaws that are related to resolutions. All the proposals we'll be discussing today have been reviewed by both the Resolutions Committee and by the full VSBA board. The process began with submissions by member school districts back in April. Those proposals were compiled and reviewed by the Resolutions Committee, which is made up of one representative from each of the VSBA's 11 Yes, I'm on the right one. Sorry. 11 regions. The committee utilized an equity lens tool and discussed each proposal and then made recommendations to the board for each proposal. The committee's options for recommendations were pass, do not pass, or take no position. The committee's recommendations were provided to the full board, and in August, the full board reviewed the committee's recommendations and took its own positions. Again, using pass, do not pass, or take no position on each proposed resolution. The board's recommendations are provided in the board report. For the existing or the current resolutions, the committee and the VSBA board voted to recommend either amend, delete, or continue. And although the board makes a recommendation for each proposal, its vote is not binding. All resolutions will be presented to the entire membership at the annual business meeting in October, when one voting delegate from each VSBA member board will make the final determination on the proposals, including any changes to the existing resolutions. The VSBA's bylaws, which you can see here, require 60% of the voting delegates to pass a resolution. So more than a majority requires a full 60%. The annual meeting this year will be held on October 23rd via Zoom. And really, that's an effort to be sure we can capture as many participants as possible. Please remember that every supervisory union or supervisory district with an active FY26 VSBA membership sends one delegate to the annual meeting to vote. A superintendent is not eligible to vote. More board members can attend and participate in discussion, but only one member will vote. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over this webinar to the chair of the Resolutions Committee, Mark Clough. Mark is the vice president of the VSBA and serves on the Peachum School District Board, which is part of Caledonia Central Supervisory Union. Mark will facilitate the presentation of the proposed resolutions.
Thank you, Sandra. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for getting on and your passion for public education. Appreciate your involvement. Thank you. This next slide shows who was on the Resolutions Committee. As vice chair, I was the chairman of this committee. By the bylaws, we had good participation. We had a lot of great discussion. And we actually got to a point where we did our own resolution to try to encompass some of the other resolutions that we saw here. Also, the staff, Sandra, I can't say enough for how she organized this, kept us on track, and got this organized and got us through 3 meetings that we had. She did an exemplary job. The committee met 3 times with communication to submitting boards in between meetings. The board met to review the committee's recommendations in August, the full board. The membership will vote on these proposed resolutions at the VSBA annual meeting, which is on October 23rd. That's when these will be voted on. These are just reviewed and recommended at this point in time. So the next slide shows the encapsulation of all of them. There are 11. As a reminder, please review the board's report, which summarizes the proposed resolutions and the board's recommendation. That information can be found on page 2 of the board report. As we review the proposed resolutions, keep in mind that only the "therefore be it resolved" language appears in the resolutions. All "whereas" language will be removed. And I do know it helped people formulate their "to be resolved" because we did want to impeach them. So we'll get started. Essex Westford School District. This is resolution number 1, was submitted by Essex Westford School District, and the subject is universal school meals. The proposed resolution would amend an existing resolution by removing the last sentence. The resolution reads, "Therefore be it resolved that the Vermont School Boards Association shall advocate for and support state policies, including stable and adequate funding to maintain and strengthen Vermont's universal free schools program as established under 16 VSA 126-4A, reflecting this commitment by amending a past resolution from VSBA supports universal school meals in Vermont schools. The funding should come from a source other than the education fund." So we passed this as a continuing resolution with that change. And we have present the author of this, Robert Carpenter, and we'd love to hear from you on this.
Sure. Well, thank you all for your time today. And just to clarify too, the amendment in there is just to remove the piece of language where it states the funding should come from a source other than the education fund. One of the things us as a district working with our school support services, specifically around nutrition, highlighted in this past year that it kind of put at odds both trying to support universal school meals and also trying to remove that funding from the ed fund, puts it at a much greater risk. So through a lot of consultation with individuals who are working on the ground, they advocated strongly to our board, just saying, hey, this is a big issue that is continuing to arise, especially with removing funding from the ed fund and trying to find another location in the environment that we live in right now, both federally and across the state. And the other aspect of this is just thinking about VSBA staff. If we as an association and members of the association really truly believe that we want to support universal school meals, let's give them that as the primary target, because trying to do that at the same time of removing that funding from the ed fund and finding another source often can kind of be at odds. So if we're truly wanting to support universal free meals, keeping that as the primary piece, and then, let the state and the legislatures figure out the other aspect around funding. But for us as an association, specifically focused on just supporting universal school meals in general. I'm happy to take any questions. And again, there's a lot more information in the actual resolution and the language, but I appreciate your recommendation from the subcommittee there to recommend this as passed. And just a huge thank you from our nutrition workers too, not just from our district, but multiple other districts as well, that have kind of been keeping an eye on this. So thank you.
Great values, Robert. We really appreciated that. Thank you. We'll move on to the next slide. Proposal number 2 comes from Lake Region Union High School Board, North Country Supervisory Union. The proposal reads, therefore be it resolved, any changes to the structure of public education in Vermont should maintain the democratic process by keeping in place local control and decision-making for schools. If consolidation and closure of schools are proposed, the General Assembly should study the impact on local communities using Vermont-based data to support decisions before enacting such changes. The General Assembly should also consider the efforts already underway by local school boards to address the issues of declining enrollment, increasing costs, and aging school buildings, and evaluate the impact of policy already enacted that have the same goals. I believe this was take no position, and Gaston is here to provide the rationale.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Act 73 details proposals for education reform that call for the formation of larger school districts, supervisory unions, or supervisory districts with a centralized school board. At its core, education transformation will lead to consolidation and closing of schools. Closing a rural community school is a hardship for our local communities. The authority to close a school should not rest on a centralized board with little or no community affiliation or understanding of the real impact on families of students or on the financial impact on the community. There are two schools of thought for boards contemplating future plans for their schools. The first is a wait and see attitude for what the state will do with its education transformation plan. And the second is to move ahead with local plans to operate local schools more efficiently and address school infrastructure needs. Some communities have considered ways to address this issue, to address issues they confront, including closing schools. Exploration of whether or not there may or may not be alternatives to closing or consolidating a community school should be made by the local community who better understand their situation as well as that of their neighbors. This resolution proposes that the VSBA take the position that prior to making system-wide changes in school governance, that the legislature maintain local control of community schools in a democratic process. Impacts on communities should be studied carefully and must take into consideration the work that local school districts are doing or have done to manage education spending and plan for infrastructure needs prior to and while education transformation is being considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaston. Next slide is resolution number 3. This is going to be the Gaston show here for a while, which is a good thing. Also submitted by Lake Region Union High School, Lake Region Elementary, Middle School, North Country Supervisory Union Board, and the subject is a statewide teacher's contract. The proposed resolution, therefore be it resolved that any action of the Vermont General Assembly regarding a statewide teacher's contract include an in-depth cost-benefit analysis with the final financial impact on the lowest spending and highest spending school districts. In addition, a study should be made of the efforts and best practices used by other states to manage teachers' contracts in light of cost efficiencies and education outcomes, and that no move to a statewide teacher's contract be enacted without a detailed demonstration of how it will provide cost savings and better student outcomes. Gaston.
Yes. Hey, Mark, I think you're on the wrong slide for the.
Oh, I'm on 4. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let's
So
do
that's
let's
okay.
do
We
number
can
4
do that
since I did it, and we'll go back to 3.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So saving money by implementing a statewide teacher's contract has been identified as a potential cost measure by the governor and legislature as they worked on education reform proposals during the last legislative session. It stands to reason that a statewide teacher's contract will lead to a leveling up of teacher and education support personnel salaries across the state. Indeed, the highest salaries and benefits package will quickly be a starting point for salary and benefit negotiations. The pressure of higher salaries on local budgets could lead to reductions in force of both licensed and support staff. Such an action would not support student learning, especially in schools with high-need student populations. In addition, there has been no Vermont-based data to support the claim of savings while improving outcomes. The only statewide contract for education staff currently in Vermont is for health insurance. That effort has not yielded the savings promised by the governor. Further, the only state that we were able to find that worked towards a statewide teacher contract was in Rhode Island, and that proposal did not gain traction. This proposal asked the VSBA to challenge any statewide teacher contract proposal for an in-depth cost-benefit analysis, financial impact on local school district budgets, and detailed demonstration of how such a proposal would cut costs and improve student outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gaston. Okay, so number 3, very important one as well, and this is on the school funding formula from Gaston's group as well. Therefore, be it resolved, this is number 3, that the General Assembly shall adjust the current school funding system to address the concern that rising education taxes are unsustainable. This should be done in several ways, including 1, basing more of the funding formula on school district and resident taxpayer ability to pay, and 2, addressing school budget cost drivers over which local school boards have no control. These include children's mental health care, staff health insurance, special education services and costs, and transportation. No changes in education funding should be enacted without a thorough analysis of the impact both on individual school districts and the individual taxpayers in Vermont. You're up.
Okay, thank you, Mark, again. So nearly a third of Vermont school districts took more than one vote to pass their FY 2025 school budget. The message is and was very clear. Vermonters are concerned about ever-rising property taxes. Act 73 proposes a foundation formula to replace the current funding formula used by the state to fund education as a means of curbing rising property taxes for Vermonters. The main rationale seems to be that a foundation formula will be less complicated and will somehow allow the state to become more efficient and spend less on education while at the same time improving student outcomes. Sounds intriguing, yet no Vermont-based data has been provided to support the claim that reduced education spending with presumed reallocation of funds would improve student learning. In addition, using a foundation formula would allow the state legislature to tell or mandate what the spending will be per student instead of allowing local boards working with their school staff and administrators who have direct insight and knowledge of their student population and their needs to make the budget decisions and then put it to a democratic vote of the local communities. Foundation formulas have in the past resulted in cuts in education grants from the state whenever there are budget pressures. That is, the legislature could not fully fund the education budget calculated by a foundation formula. This would tie financial support for student education to the annual ebbs and flows of the state's budget, a situation that would prove difficult for school administrators and potentially negatively impact student learning. Lastly, the Joint Fiscal Office projections indicate that the use of a foundation formula would not reduce property taxes across the state. Indeed, projections indicate that some communities would see double-digit property tax increases, a notion that does not support Vermonters' concerns with rising property taxes. This resolution proposes that the VSBA take the position that the state needs to address school budget cost drivers, and Mark mentioned those, the student mental health needs, services, health insurance, special education, and transportation, and that any proposed changes need to be thoroughly analyzed for its impact on a community and on individual taxpayers. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gaston. And this was passed as a regular resolution. Now we come up to Gaston's last one, I believe.
Mark,
It's number
to clarify, it was recommended to pass.
recommended to pass. Thank you. Yeah, all of these are recommendations. So Gaston's group as well reworked vaping on school grounds. We had a policy for it, but he narrowed it down and let us know how important this was. So go ahead, Gaston. All right, let me read it first. Therefore, be it resolved that the VSBA will petition the Governor and General Assembly to instruct the Agency of Education to reconvene the Advisory Council on Wellness and Comprehensive Health to review the current state of the use of electronic vaping products among Vermont students, investigate ways to curb the increased use in middle and high school students, and take decisive action to address this issue, to address this increase by identifying the resources for cessation programs, counseling support, and preventative education. Go ahead, Gaston.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. Again, this is my last, our last resolution. So an electronic cigarette or a vape is a device that simulates tobacco smoking. It consists of an atomizer, a power source such as a battery, and a container such as a cartridge or tank. So instead of smoke, the user inhales a vapor, and that's why it's called vaping. The increase in vaping by our students in Vermont is a growing issue locally and around the state, as identified in the 2023 Youth Risk Behavior Survey that is administered by the Vermont Department of Health and Agency of Education. Last year, in FY 2025, the number of NCSU North Country Supervisory Union student hearings on the use of vaping devices on school property greatly increased. At the middle school level, repeat offenders were given school suspensions, They were given school suspension, in some cases expulsions, and all student offenders needed to attend sessions with Journey to Recovery counselors. It became apparent to us that obtaining vaping devices was easy and that addiction to vaping ingredients, that is nicotine, was an issue for many of these repeat offenders. While the vaping incidence is under investigation, our administrators indicated that it is easy for students to hide vaping devices given the size of the device. This is a complex problem that requires a focused effort to determine how best to counter this surge in vaping. The status quo has failed our students, and the state should and ought to address how to curb this growing unhealthy and dangerous trend in our students. It is my opinion that vaping is for today's generation the fight against the tobacco industry of past generations. This resolution proposes to task the VSBA to petition the Governor and General Assembly to instruct the AOE to reconvene its Advisory Council on Wellness and Comprehensive Health, which, by the way, last met in 2023, to begin the hard work of fighting against the vaping industry to curb this unhealthy and dangerous habit in our youth. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaston. This was also a recommendation to pass as a regular resolution. You did a lot of work, Gaston. Thanks a lot. Number 6, let me introduce Andrea Hibbert. She has joined us. She's on the Peacham School Board, and she's our representative to discuss the resolution that we have here around small community schools. Therefore, be it resolved that the Vermont School Boards Association advocates for policies and resources that recognize the unique value and contributions that community primary elementary schools provide to the communities they serve. They are a cornerstone of their communities and create identity and connection that is mutually essential, providing educational, cultural, and economic vitality for Vermont communities. Andrea, you want to talk to the rationale?
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. And I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I was teaching right up until 12:20, so coming to you live from a Vermont classroom. So this resolution we felt was a really important articulation of the value of small community schools and sort of their value, not just as an educational institution, but as a community institution, and one that has a sort of bi-directional, mutually beneficial relationship between community and school. And I think that we are talking about community schools, not necessarily meaning like small schools like Peachum in small rural areas, but also just like the community school created around like Union Elementary in Montpelier, right? It doesn't need to be small community specific, but just that there's this mutually beneficial relationship between a community school and the community that it serves and belongs to and upholds.
Awesome. I hope that makes a lot of sense to everybody.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so with some changes, because we brought it in a little bit specific that weren't really defensible on an advocacy peer, we redid it, and we recommend to pass this as a regular resolution, which you just heard. Thanks, Andrea. That's number 6. We're jumping to number 7. This one was submitted by the Resolutions Committee because we saw a whole bunch of resolutions come in on a certain subject, and we wanted to be sure that everybody understood where our values were as a resolution committee when we saw these other resolutions. Therefore, be it resolved that the VSBA advocates for strong, meaningful participation and decision-making by local school boards during all remaining phases of Vermont's long-term education transformation process, especially regarding decisions that affect the future of their schools. Additionally, VSBA supports a process for a community served by a school to have a choice in decisions regarding school closures. So we hoped we encompassed a lot of what was presented by putting together this resolution. And so that was a recommendation to pass as a regular resolution. All right, number 8, from Wyndham Southeast School District. Let me see here. The subject is the consolidation of schools. The proposed resolution says, therefore, it be resolved that the School Boards Association shall vigorously oppose any legislation that forces the consolidation of school districts, makes it easier to close small schools against the will of the community, imposes minimum class sizes on small elementary schools, and further be it resolved that the VSBA will actively support legislation that ensures local communities remain a strong and meaningful voice in all decisions about the future of their schools. The recommendation on this was to take no position and hope that we had encompassed that with some of the other resolutions we had already seen. But Tim is here to talk to us about how this came about.
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate the previous resolution number 7. Our school district wrote this resolution before we knew about that resolution. But the heart of this resolution is simple. Vermont schools and school communities deserve a meaningful voice in the future of their schools. The legislature will be considering measures that would force district consolidation and thus ease school closures, despite the absence of compelling evidence that such actions produce cost savings or improve student outcomes. In fact, multiple studies, including those by VOE itself, have found little to no financial benefit from consolidation, particularly since many school districts, including ours, have already centralized some administrative functions at the SU. at the SU level. And so what would be gained in school district consolidation is not efficiency or financial savings, but the erosion of local accountability and the weakening of community trust in public education. This is why our board feels this resolution is so necessary. The VSBA has not yet taken a clear stand against forced school district. The VSBA has not yet taken a clear stand against forced school district consolidation. On the fundamental question of whether or not the VSBA should actively oppose new legislation that would once again strip local boards and voters of their influence and authority, the VSBA has been largely silent. This is not a question of policy, it is a question of values. Small schools provide sensible class sizes, a sense of belonging, and individualized attention that large schools struggle to match. Small schools like ours in Putney, Guilford, and Dummerston, and many more across the state, are very much the heart of these towns. They provide not just quality education, but community identity. They are why many families choose to live in our small towns. If we allow legislation to make these schools easier to close, we will not only harm the educational opportunities of our children, but also weaken the social fabric of dozens and dozens of Vermont communities. For these reasons, I urge you to support this resolution. It does not ask VSBA to take a radical or partisan stance. It asks the VSBA to do what it exists to do, represent the voices of all Vermont schools, including those from small and rural districts. We cannot claim to support equity if we allow our schools and communities to be sacrificed in the name of unproven efficiencies. This resolution is unequivocal. The VSBA must vigorously oppose forced consolidation of school districts and defend the right of local communities to determine the course of their schools.
Thank you, Tim. We understand your position. Very thoughtful. Thank you. At this point, the recommendation was to take no position in light of everything else we had put together prior to that. But again, you'll have another shot at the annual meeting, Tim. Number 9 from Ludlow Mount Holly. Therefore, be it resolved that the VSBA will vigorously oppose any legislation that seeks to force the consolidation of school districts and make it easier to force the closure of small schools, and will impose minimum class sizes on small elementary schools, and will support legislation to ensure that the local communities have a strong voice in deciding whether small schools should close. David Martin's here to speak to the rationale on this one.
Well, thank you, Tim. Tim spoke much more eloquently than I will about the reasons for this. I'll only emphasize that there was, first of all, there was no study of the results of Act 46, the forced consolidations there. What I think we all saw was a reduced community engagement after the districts got merged against our will. And there's no evidence that consolidating school districts saves any money, because for the most part, small districts like ours have already moved all their administrative functions to supervisory unions. And so, again, additional mergers won't save any money. So all they'll do is reduce the amount of community control and reduce community engagement with the schools. The same on minimum class sizes. It seems like the push for minimum class sizes is really a push to close small schools, because small schools are the ones that have problem meeting those minimum class sizes. And of course, the initial proposal had very large minimums that would have had a serious impact on the progress of the students in those classes with much larger classes. I'll only add that I personally don't think that merging supervisory unions will save any money either, but we aren't as opposed to that because control will remain at the school district level. But I don't think that the resolution proposed by the committee goes far enough in pushing for these measures.
Thank you, David. Is that everything? Okay. Well, thank you, David. Again, come to the annual meeting and we can have more discussion on this. Number 10 is from Wellspring Unified Union School District. Therefore, be it resolved that the VSBA will vigorously oppose any legislation that seeks to force the consolidation of school districts or make it easier to force the closure of small schools, or will impose minimum class sizes on small elementary schools, and will support legislation to ensure that local communities have a strong voice in deciding whether small schools should close. We didn't have anybody from Wellspring commit to doing the rationale, but I think we heard David and Tim on a very similar sort of tone. The recommendation was to take no position on this one as well. Jeannie, number 11, and our last one, from the Lincoln School District Board. Therefore, be it resolved that the VSBA will vigorously oppose any legislation that seeks to force the consolidation of school districts or make it easier to force the closure of small schools, or that will impose minimum class sizes on small elementary schools or impose mandated district sizes, and will support legislation to ensure that local communities have a strong voice in deciding whether schools should close. The recommendation from the committee was to take no position at this point, but Jeannie's here to also speak to this, this rationale.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to everyone who's attending. Tim and David covered the many items really so well that I will be brief and just add that at its regular meeting on June 10th, the Lincoln School District Board voted unanimously to support this resolution. The board is committed to democratic principles, due process, and the importance of community voice in decision-making about the future of its school and district. Board members are also aware that research on consolidation of schools and districts shows that projected cost savings are offset by other costs. For example, transportation and academic gains are not assured. I'm going to make a slight parenthetical remark and say there's lots of research on this topic going back a number of years, and even more recently out of Arkansas, there's a very recent study on mandated consolidation that showed no savings and little to no academic improvement, and the researchers spoke to the potential harms of that effort. In addition, this research shows that there's especially concern when the consolidation is not supported by local communities and also in rural areas. That is, there's very low probability of success. During the process for H454, the board kept a close eye on it as it progressed through the legislature, and we had and still have significant concerns about the potential for mandated district consolidation and other actions that will make it easier to close schools without the ability for communities to have a meaningful voice in those decisions. We urge the membership of the Vermont School Board Association to adopt this resolution to prevent forced consolidation that is harmful to communities, families, and students, and instead support due process and community voice that is the foundation of democratic principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeannie. Appreciate your comments. Advocacy. All right, that's all of the proposed resolutions. As noted at the start of the webinar, some resolutions are continuing or ongoing, and other resolutions in effect will be in effect until the next annual meeting, when they may be deleted, continued, or amended by the vote of the membership. We call these regular resolutions. Members will be voting on this slate of recommendations on existing resolutions at the annual meeting. And that's the next slide. Review of existing resolutions. And you can see some sunsetted, some didn't make any sense any longer as we reviewed them because things had happened. The vaping one that Gaston had, we thought we had covered. He did a better job with it, so that one got removed from the existing and became a proposed. So we scrubbed through all of these and made our changes. So thanks to all of our panelists today for providing the background information on your submissions. We are now, as I said, we're looking at the existing resolutions. And these are ones that have been proposed and passed by in the annual meeting and past meetings. Open it up for any questions at this point, and it may be more about process than anything. But October 23rd is the important date. And that's Zoom, right, Sandra? Want to go ahead, Sandra?
Yes, it will be held Zoom. There's a QR code here on this slide. So you could, if you want to use your phone and quickly just scan it, it will take you right to the registration page, or you can go to the events tab on the VSBA website and register there. Again, all board members can participate in the discussion, ask questions, ask for clarification, and then each member, supervisory union or supervisory district will send one voting delegate. So that should be determined ahead of time. When you register for this, you will be indicating whether you are the voting delegate, the alternate voting delegate, or neither, and you're just attending as a participant. So be prepared for those questions as well. I want to just pause and be sure there are no questions about the resolutions piece before I share any more. Did you see anything, Debbie or Amy?
There's nothing in the question box.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank everybody for their advocacy around this and our students. I mean, I believe we have a lot in common as we try to navigate this, and we're just trying to do it the best way that we can. And I think we overlap a lot on our values. So thank you, everyone, today. Appreciate it.
One more slide, Mark. Thank you. We would be remiss if we didn't mention the annual conference. And so this QR code will take you to registration for the annual conference. It's a joint effort between the VSBA and the VSA, happening at the Doubletree in Burlington on October 29th for board officers and superintendents, and on October 30th for all board members. More information is on our homepage or on our events page as well. We hope we can see you all there. I want to thank again Mark for facilitating being the chair of the committee and facilitating this webinar, and all of your contributions in between all of the meetings we've had. And to our committee, to our panelists today for helping us understand the background information on your proposals, and for our webinar viewers for learning more about the resolutions ahead of the annual business meeting. And before we let you go, one last ask to please complete the webinar survey, which will pop up when you leave. We read every response and we take the feedback really seriously. We look at that to improve our lunchtime webinar, so it's really important. Thank you so much.